My name is Imani Carver, and I want to tell you about the day I stopped being someone's bride and started being someone's reckoning. I was standing in a hallway of the Hartwell Grand Hotel in a gown that cost more than my mother's first car, my hands shaking so badly the bouquet trembled in them, when I pushed open a door I was never supposed to open. I found my fiancé, Donovan Sterling, with his hands in the hair of my best friend of 14 years, Bianca Wells, her lipstick smeared across his collar like a signature on a contract I never agreed to. I screamed. I don't remember the sound leaving my body, only the look on Donovan's face. Guilt, raw and total, like a man watching his own house burn down with him still inside it. Bianca didn't even flinch. She chewed her gum, looked at me like I was the inconvenience in the room, and walked past me toward the door like she had somewhere better to be. I ran. I don't know how I ended up on the rooftop of that hotel, only that the wind was the first honest thing that had touched me all day. And that's where I met the man who would turn my whole life upside down. Except this one did it on purpose, and he did it with his hands stretched out toward me, like he'd been waiting his whole life for this exact moment to happen. He said, "Marry me instead. Use me as you will, if you want revenge on my brother." I looked at him and saw Donovan's face wearing someone else's confidence. Sharper jaw, braids pulled back clean, one earring catching the rooftop light, a stillness in his eyes that Donovan never had. I asked him who he was. He said, "I'm Dorian. I'm the brother nobody remembers exists until they need something from him." I should have walked away. I think some part of me knew, even then, that saying yes to that hand was the most dangerous decision I would ever make. I walked into that room a bride. I walked onto that rooftop a weapon. He told me to use him for revenge. I said yes. I had no idea I was about to fall in love with the wrong twins' plan. Imani still remembers the question that wouldn't leave her alone that night. If he hated his brother enough to take his bride, why did he sound like he'd been planning to save me long before Donovan ever broke my heart? That question would follow her through every room of the marriage that came next. 3 things stayed buried that night on the rooftop, and they would not stay buried for long. Was Dorian Sterling really offering revenge, or had he wanted Imani long before there was anything to take her from? What actually happened between Donovan and Bianca before that wedding day? Because the guilt on Donovan's face when she found them did not look like a man who'd simply given in to temptation once. And underneath both of those questions sat the one nobody in that family wanted answered. Why had Augustus and Eleanor Sterling spent 34 years loving one son and erasing the other? And what was Dorian finally going to do about it now that he had the money, the power, and his brother's bride standing in front of him? It wasn't just a wedding that collapsed that day. It was the last lie 3 families had been telling themselves for almost 3 decades, and Imani Carver had just walked directly into the middle of it wearing white. Everyone in that hotel believed they were watching a heartbroken woman fall apart on a rooftop. They were actually watching the first move of a man who had spent 14 years building an empire for exactly this one afternoon. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Imani grew up in Cedar Falls, the only daughter of a nurse and a high school football coach, raised on the kind of love that didn't have money attached to it, but never once felt like it was missing anything. She met Donovan Sterling at 24, on the sidelines of her father's old high school football field, where the Sterling family's construction company was funding a renovation project. She'd come by to drop off her father's forgotten lunch and found Donovan arguing good-naturedly with a contractor about blueprint specs, sleeves rolled up, hands covered in chalk dust from the field lines. He noticed her before she noticed him, jogged over still holding a roll of blueprints, and introduced himself with an apology for staring. He was warm. He was steady. He laughed easily and remembered small details about her life that most men forgot the moment she said them. She fell for him slowly, the way you fall for someone you actually intend to keep. What she didn't know what almost no one outside that family knew, was that Donovan had spent his entire childhood as the chosen one, and his twin brother Dorian had spent that same childhood learning exactly what it felt like to be the afterthought. Augustus and Eleanor Sterling never sat down and decided to love one son more than the other. That would have required admitting it out loud. Instead, it happened in 100 small choices that added up to one unmistakable pattern. Donovan got the better tutors. Donovan got the new car at 16, while Dorian inherited the old one. Donovan got taken to every father-son outing, while Dorian stayed home with a vague excuse about scheduling. Dorian still remembers the exact words his mother used the day he turned 19 and asked, for the first time in his life, for something just for himself. The funding to enter a private entrepreneurship accelerator program he'd been accepted into on his own merit. No help from anyone. Eleanor looked at him and said, Dorian, sweetheart, you've never been serious about anything long enough to finish it. Let's give this one to your brother instead. He needs it for law school more than you need it for some idea. Augustus didn't even look up from his newspaper when he agreed. Dorian remembers standing in that kitchen and feeling something inside his chest go quiet in a way that scared him more than screaming would have. He didn't yell. He didn't cry where they could see him. He simply nodded, walked up to his room, and made a promise to himself that he would repeat in his head every single day for the next 20 years. Since my family doesn't care about me, I will become wealthy enough that I will never need them to. At 20, he packed 2 bags and left in the middle of the night without telling a single member of his family where he was going. He flew to Singapore with the small inheritance his grandmother had quietly left him, enrolled himself in business school under a scholarship he fought for without anyone's help, and built the foundation of what would eventually become Crown and Veil Holdings, a name he chose specifically because it had nothing to do with the Sterling name at all. He didn't want anything that was theirs touching what he built alone. By 26, Dorian Sterling was a millionaire. By 31, he was a billionaire, and the city he'd grown up in had no idea he'd ever left, because nobody had thought to ask where he'd gone. The first time Imani ever crossed paths with him, she had no memory of it at all. It happened 18 months before the wedding, in a private gym attached to a hotel where Dorian was staying during a business trip back to the city he swore he'd never return to permanently. She was on a treadmill, laughing at something on her phone, completely unaware that across the room, a man who looked exactly like her fiancé, except for the braids, the earring, and a stillness Donovan never carried, had stopped mid-set to stare at her like he'd just been handed proof that some things in life were worth coming back for. Dorian still remembers what he told himself in that exact moment, standing there with a towel forgotten in his hand. That's the one thing in this city I actually want, and my brother already has her. He didn't approach her. He didn't say a single word. He simply watched her finish her workout and leave, filed the memory away like he filed every other piece of information he ever gathered, and went back to building the empire that would eventually let him take whatever he wanted without ever having to ask permission for it. He came back to the city permanently 2 years later to expand Crown and Veil into the same market his family's old construction business had once dominated, and that's when he discovered exactly who his brother had become engaged to. He also discovered, through the quiet channels billionaires use to learn things they aren't supposed to know yet, that his brother had not been treating that woman the way a man treats something he actually values. Dorian sat in his car outside Donovan's office building one evening and said something out loud to no one but himself. He has everything. He's always had everything, and now he has the one thing I actually wanted, and he doesn't even see what he has. It wasn't jealousy in the way people usually mean it. It was the slow, patient recognition of a man who had spent his whole life watching his brother be handed things he never had to earn, finally deciding he was done watching. The morning of the wedding, Imani sat in the bridal suite of the Hartwell Grand while her mother fixed the last pin in her veil, and she remembers thinking that she had never felt more certain of anything in her life. She still remembers the exact thought that crossed her mind in that mirror. I finally found a love that doesn't have conditions attached to it. She had no idea that 3 floors below her, in a room reserved for the groomsmen, her best friend Bianca Wells was standing far too close to Donovan, her hand resting on his chest in a way that had nothing to do with friendship at all. What Imani didn't know, what she wouldn't learn until much later, in pieces that would each hurt worse than the one before it, was that Bianca had wanted Donovan for years, quietly, with a hunger she dressed up as loyalty to hide it from everyone, including herself. Bianca had drugged him months earlier at a bachelor weekend none of the other groomsmen remembered clearly either, slipping something into his drink before pulling him into a hotel room and taking photographs while he was barely conscious enough to understand what was happening to him. When Donovan woke up the next morning with no memory of the night and Bianca's photographs already saved to a private folder, she made her terms clear without raising her voice once. Stay silent, keep playing the devoted fiancé, or she would destroy his name, his engagement, and his family's business reputation with pictures he never consented to and could never explain his way out of. Donovan spent the next 8 months living inside that threat, hating himself every single day for a choice he never actually made, terrified that telling Imani the truth would cost him everything before he found a way out of it on his own terms. He never found that way out. The night before the wedding, Bianca pulled him into a service hallway and told him she wasn't done with him yet, that she intended to make sure he never fully belonged to anyone but her, and Donovan, exhausted, cornered, and disgusted with the man he'd become, let it happen one final time, telling himself it would be the last. He still remembers the words he said to himself walking back to his room that night. I will fix this after the wedding. I will find a way to make this right without losing her. He never got the chance. Imani opened that door an hour before the ceremony was supposed to begin, looking for him to deliver a small gift, and found exactly what 8 months of silence had been protecting. Imani, wait. It's not what it looks like, Donovan said, his voice cracking apart in real time, his hands lifting toward her like he could physically hold the moment back from happening. Then what is it, Donovan? Imani's voice came out of her like something tearing. Tell me what it looks like, because from where I'm standing, it looks like the man I was about to marry has been lying to me with my best friend's mouth. Bianca finally spoke, and her voice carried no urgency at all, no panic, nothing but a flat, almost bored kind of cruelty. Don't make this bigger than it is. Imani, you were always going to lose him to somebody eventually. I just made sure it was somebody who actually wanted him. Imani doesn't remember deciding to run. She remembers her feet moving before the rest of her caught up, the hallway blurring, a stairwell door slamming behind her, and then the open air of the rooftop hitting her face like the first true thing that had happened to her all day. That's where Dorian found her, standing at the railing with mascara carving lines down her cheeks, her bouquet crushed in one fist. He didn't ask if she was okay. He simply walked up beside her, close enough that she registered the same face she'd just left downstairs, wearing a completely different posture, and said the words that would change the rest of both their lives. You don't know me, Dorian said quietly, but I know exactly what just happened to you in that room, and I know exactly what it feels like to watch someone hand my brother something they should have protected better. Marry me instead. Use me as you will if you want revenge on my brother. Who are you? Imani asked, even though some part of her already understood. I'm Dorian, he said. I'm the brother nobody remembers exists until they need something from him. And right now, I think you need exactly what I'm offering. She still remembers what she told herself in that exact moment, looking into a face that was almost identical to the one that had just broken her, except for the steadiness in it that Donovan had never once carried. "I have nothing left to lose, and he is offering me a way to take something back." She said yes. She didn't know yet that the man offering revenge had been waiting 18 months to offer her something else entirely. The wedding that followed that same evening didn't happen in some quiet corner of the hotel. It happened in the exact ballroom that had already been fully decorated, fully seated, and fully waiting for Donovan's wedding to begin, because nobody downstairs had been told the first one was off. Imani told herself it was strategy. She still remembers what she said to her own reflection in a borrowed mirror backstage. "This is a transaction. This is not a love story." She believed that for exactly 4 months. The moment she said yes on the rooftop, Dorian was already reaching for his phone. He made 3 calls before they'd even left the railing, and by the time they reached the ballroom doors, hotel staff were already tearing down the signage with Donovan's name on it and swapping the floral arrangements table by table for something richer, while 200 confused guests sat waiting, assuming the delay was nothing more than bridal nerves. He asked her once, quietly, backstage, if she wanted to change out of the gown she'd been wearing when she found Donovan in that bed. She told him no. She still remembers the exact reason she gave him. "This dress doesn't belong to him anymore. I'm taking it back too." Dorian disappeared just long enough to change into a black tuxedo, sharp and unhurried, and when the doors finally opened, the room he walked into had been rebuilt around her in under an hour, because money like his didn't wait in line for anything. What the guests saw next is the part of the story that made it impossible to stay quiet. The doors opened, the music started, and the groom walking down that aisle had Donovan's exact face. Same jaw, same eyes, same height, but braided hair, a single diamond earring, and a stillness nobody in that family had ever seen Donovan carry. Whispers started before he'd even reached the altar. Imani's mother gripped her husband's arm in the second row and breathed out, "That is not the man our daughter was supposed to marry." Not as a question, but as a fact she couldn't yet explain. By the time the officiant said the final words, half the room had phones raised, recording not because anyone had decided to, but because nobody in that ballroom could process what they were watching without filming it first to prove to themselves later that it had actually happened. The clip was online before the couple finished their first dance. By midnight, it had moved through the entire city's social circles, captioned with every version of the same disbelieving question. "Isn't that Donovan Sterling's brother? Isn't that Donovan Sterling's bride?" Augustus and Eleanor Sterling found out the same way half the city did, scrolling through their phones in their own living room, watching their 2 sons' entire history collide in a single video neither of them had been warned was coming. Donovan was 3 floors up, still sitting in the wreckage of his own ruined wedding, when the first message reached him. He watched the clip twice before he understood what he was looking at, and by the 3rd time he was already moving, shirt untucked, keys in his fist, his mother calling his phone over and over while he ignored every ring. By the time he reached the ballroom, the ceremony was already over and the guests were filtering into the lobby in stunned clusters, which meant what happened next happened away from every camera that had just made the wedding famous. He found his brother in a private hallway just off the ballroom, Imani a few steps behind him, and the confrontation that followed was the one both brothers had been avoiding their entire lives. "You took what was mine," Donovan said, his voice already shaking with the kind of fury that had nowhere else to go. "For what? Because you wanted revenge? Because you're getting back at me for something Mom and Dad did to you? Is it my fault they treated you that way?" Dorian didn't move. He didn't raise his voice. He simply looked at his brother for a long moment before answering, and when he spoke, his tone was almost gentle, which made it worse. "No, brother, this isn't revenge. You lost what was yours because you didn't value it enough. I only wanted her, and I took the opportunity you made possible because I wanted her as well. Don't you get it? How did you suddenly become so selfish? Donovan shot back, stepping closer. You were never like this when we were little. Dorian actually laughed at that, a quiet, controlled sound that had no warmth in it at all. He closed the distance between himself and his brother, stopping close enough that his next words landed like something physical. Did you just call me selfish? Me selfish? He pressed one finger gently against his brother's chest, a gesture that looked almost tender and felt like a verdict. You always had what was mine. You were the favorite son from the day we were born. They gave you everything and never looked at me once. Did you ever ask me if I was okay? Did you ever once talk to your parents about considering me? You smiled. You even cried when I touched something that had been given only to you. So tell me again, who's the selfish one? You're angry because I went after something I wanted, something that happened to belong to you. You want me to sacrifice my own feelings again, the way I did our entire childhood? I'm not that boy anymore. I have feelings too, Donovan. My only promise to myself was to give myself everything our parents, no, I mean your parents, could never give me. And if taking the one thing you didn't value enough is part of that happiness, then I'm taking every piece of it. Donovan's chest was rising and falling like he couldn't get enough air into it. You don't even love her. This is about us. This has always been about us. You want to hear something more interesting? Dorian said, his voice never once climbing above a quiet, even register. I loved her the very first day I ever saw her.
So I took her
long
back.
before you ever cheated, long before any of this happened. I just never told her. And then I found out my own brother had the one thing I wanted my entire life, and he didn't even value her. So I took her back. How about that? Donovan didn't have an answer for that. He stood in that hallway, shaking, and for the first time in his entire life, understood what it felt like to be the one without the power in the room. Imani stood a few steps behind Dorian through every second of it, and the sentence that broke something loose in her chest wasn't the accusation. It was the confession buried inside it. He loved me before any of this happened, and for the last few hours I had let myself believe I was only a weapon he was using to get even with his brother. She didn't say anything yet. She watched Donovan walk away from them down that hallway, his shoulders still shaking, and she let him go. He didn't go far. 2 corridors down, he found Bianca Wells standing alone near the service elevator, still in the same slip dress from hours earlier, watching the chaos with the same flat, unbothered expression she'd worn through all of it. Whatever was left of Donovan's composure ended the moment he saw her face. You did this, he said, his voice climbing fast, and before she could answer, he'd closed the distance and grabbed her by the collar, hauling her back against the wall. You ruined my life. Every single piece of it. The blackmail, the photos, all of it. You took everything from me, and you didn't even care whose life you were burning down to get it. Bianca didn't flinch. Her tone stayed level, almost bored. I gave you exactly what you wanted, she said, calm even with his fist still twisted in her collar. Forget Imani. She's gone. She's his now. It's just us left standing here. Donovan, the way it always should have been. Over my dead body, Donovan said, and let her go like she'd burned him, stepping back, breathing hard, disgusted with himself for the year he'd spent letting her decide who he got to be. Neither of them noticed the small security camera mounted above the service elevator, quietly recording every second of it. In the months that followed, Dorian proved to be nothing like his brother, and the difference revealed itself in small, deliberate ways that built on each other until Imani could no longer pretend she hadn't noticed. He never raised his voice, not once. not even when his own mother called to scream at him for stealing his brother's bride out of spite. He listened more than he spoke. He remembered the things Imani mentioned only once in passing and acted on them weeks later, without announcing that he had. There were mornings he carried her back to bed when she fell asleep on the couch reading, and mornings she woke to find he'd already learned exactly how she liked her coffee without being told twice. He looked at her sometimes like he was still memorizing her, like the gym, the rooftop, and every day since hadn't been enough time yet. He made her laugh in the unguarded way she used to be embarrassed by, and more than once he kissed her forehead before leaving for work, slow and unhurried, like it was the most important thing he'd do all day. He never touched her without asking first, and when she finally let him, it wasn't out of revenge anymore, and they both knew it. "I told myself I was only using you," Imani admitted to him one night, 4 months into the marriage, sitting across from him at a kitchen table neither of them had touched dinner on. "I didn't expect to actually fall for the man I was using." Dorian set his glass down slowly. "I never needed you to use me," he said. "I needed you to eventually see me. The revenge was just the door I used to walk through. Everything after that was real." 7 months into the marriage, the entire family circle collided again at Augustus and Eleanor Sterling's 35th wedding anniversary gala, the kind of event neither brother could skip without the whole city noticing. Dorian came because it was still his parents' anniversary, not because anything between them had healed. He sat through dinner at the same long table as Augustus and Eleanor for the first time in years, composed and unreachable, his attention never leaving Imani beside him. Both of his parents glanced his way more than once over the course of the meal, searching for some opening, some small thread to pull him back into the family, the way the night was supposed to suggest they were. He never gave them one. He didn't speak to either of them once, didn't meet their eyes longer than it took to confirm they were still looking, and by the time dessert was cleared, even the people at the far end of the table had noticed the silence radiating from his end of it. Imani hadn't seen Donovan since the night of the wedding, and for most of the evening, he kept his distance, watching her laugh easily at something Dorian said from across the room. It wasn't jealousy that finally moved him. It was watching how at ease she looked, how nothing about her seemed like a performance anymore. After the dinner had ended and the room had loosened into mingling and music, he found her alone for a moment near the terrace doors, away from the crowd. "You look happy," Donovan said, and his voice didn't carry the fury from that first night anymore, just something quieter, sadder. "I keep waiting for that to stop being true. It hasn't." "It's not going to," Imani said, gently but without hesitation. "I'm not holding on to anything from before, Donovan. I love your brother, not because of what happened to us, because of who he's actually been to me since." Dorian appeared at the terrace doors before Donovan could answer, calm as always, his hand finding the small of Imani's back like it belonged there. "This is the last time we're going to do this," he said to his brother, his voice quiet enough that only the three of them could hear it. "Not because I'm angry, because there's nothing left here for you to keep reaching for. Let her go, Donovan, for your own sake, if nothing else." He didn't wait for a response. He didn't look for his parents on the way out, didn't acknowledge a single other guest in that room. He simply guided Imani straight through the crowd and out the door, leaving his brother alone at the terrace for the second time in 7 months. The footage from the wedding night gave the city a scandal to talk about for weeks, but it never gave anyone the full truth. Donovan's fury in that hallway told the world something had broken between him and Bianca. It just didn't say what, or for how long, or how far it had actually gone. Imani still didn't have that answer either, even after everything she'd witnessed. What none of them knew yet was that Bianca Wells had not stopped at simply seducing Donovan once. She had spent 8 months blackmailing him with the photographs from that first night, threatening to release them to his family's business partners and to Imani herself if he ever told the truth about what had actually happened between them. Donovan had spent the entire engagement trapped in a silence he hated himself for keeping, terrified that confessing would cost him his name, his family's reputation, and the woman he genuinely loved all at once. The affair the public believed he'd chosen freely had never been a choice from the very beginning. It had been a leash, and Bianca had been holding the other end of it the entire time, smiling at every dinner, attending every wedding fitting, pretending to be the loyal best friend, while quietly destroying the one relationship she'd always envied. Imani learned the full truth months later when whispers about the night of the wedding, the shouting near the service elevator, a rumor about a security camera nobody could quite confirm, finally started reaching the edges of their social circle. Bianca heard the same whispers everyone else did, and she made a decision that had nothing to do with guilt. If the truth was coming out regardless, she would be the one to deliver it, on her own terms, with Imani's face in front of her when it landed. She showed up uninvited to a small dinner Imani and Dorian were hosting, walked straight past the staff at the door, and said out loud what she'd been hiding for almost a year. "You think I just got carried away with your fiancé?" Bianca said, her voice flat and unhurried, with none of the panic the moment should have called for. "I planned every second of it. I drugged him myself. I took the pictures myself. I made sure he never had a choice in any of it." Donovan, standing across the room, finally said the thing he'd been carrying for almost a year.
She blackmailed
me, Imani, from the very first night. I never wanted any of it. I tried to end it so many times, and every time I tried, she reminded me what she'd release if I did. I should have told you the moment it happened. That's the only thing I actually regret, not telling you the truth before you ever had to find out the way you did. Dorian stood near the head of the table through all of it, a glass of wine resting easy in one hand, saying nothing, intervening in nothing, the stillness of a man who wasn't worried about losing, only watching closely enough to move the instant anyone tried something foolish with his wife. Bianca wasn't finished. She turned the same flat, unhurried voice on Imani directly, every word landing like she'd rehearsed it for years. "You always have the good things, Imani. The nice men, the easy life. Even back when we were friends, I used to wonder if I was just bad luck standing next to you." Imani huffed. "Wait, what? Me? Bad luck to you?" "Yes," Bianca said, her tone never climbing an inch. "Nothing good has ever come my way since we've been friends. It all goes to you. Just you. What about me? I deserve good things too. So I took the one thing you had, to make you feel even a fraction of what I've felt watching you for years. That's exactly what you deserved. You're not the only one with a pretty face, Imani. I'm pretty too. So why does my whole life have to bend around yours, like I need your permission before I'm allowed one good thing of my own?" Imani cut her off immediately, her voice rising for the first time all night. "Enough, Bianca. You are pathetic." I kept calm through all of this because I told myself if Donovan really wanted me, he wouldn't have hurt me, and I wasn't going to beg for a love I already know I deserve. So yes, it hurt. It hurt badly, but I moved on, and now I'm exactly where you said it yourself. I have good things. That's what makes me different from you, Bianca. That's what makes me, me. Things work out for me because I let them. But you, your whole life has been miserable because bitterness has been eating you alive since the day I met you. You spent our entire friendship carrying something black and rotten in your chest instead of letting one good thing happen to you. She wasn't finished either. I shared everything with you like you were my sister. I loved you like one. We split every scholarship application together back in school, even when it meant less attention on my own application. I gave you my guest room for 8 months when your family couldn't make rent, and I never once made you feel like you owed me for it. I told every recruiter who'd listen how talented you were, even when it cost me the spotlight. And this is what you call bad luck? Bianca cut her off. Spare me. You did all of that out of pity. You felt sorry for me. No, Bianca. It wasn't pity. It was love. The love I had for you as a sister. But your soul is so black with envy that you couldn't recognize love when you had it, so you turned it into a competition instead. Imani's voice went quiet and final.
First night.
Let's see who actually rots for her choices now. That was the sentence Bianca couldn't absorb calmly. She lunged at Imani before anyone could stop her, fingers reaching for her hair. Dorian moved first. He caught both of Bianca's wrists mid-air and shoved her back, putting his own body between her and his wife without ever raising his voice. The handful of other guests still at the table had already pulled out their phones, recording a woman who, until 30 seconds earlier, half the city had still believed was simply a heartbroken bystander in someone else's scandal. Imani stood in that room, absorbing reveal after reveal, each one larger and more disorienting than the last. The affair hadn't been a betrayal of love so much as a trap built by someone who had been pretending to love her the longest. She still remembers the exact thought that settled into her chest in that moment, quiet and final. He fooled himself into thinking silence would protect me. It only delayed the day I'd have to watch him lose everything in front of me twice. The truth didn't stay contained to that dinner. Within a week, Dorian's legal team, the same precision that had built Crown and Veil from nothing, had assembled every piece of evidence Bianca had ever been careless enough to leave behind. The messages confirming the blackmail, the service elevator security footage from the night of the wedding that had quietly recorded Donovan naming the blackmail to her face, and a recorded admission of guilt she'd given in a moment of fury she would never be able to take back. Augustus and Eleanor Sterling, who had spent 35 years pretending their favoritism carried no consequences, watched their golden son's reputation collapse in the same kitchen where they had once denied their other son the only thing he'd ever asked them for, and they had nothing left to say in his defense. Dorian never raised his voice through any of it. He sat across from his parents one final time and said the only thing he had left to say to them. You spent my entire childhood protecting the son you were proud of, he told them, his tone flat and unhurried. You're about to watch him lose everything in front of the son you weren't. Eleanor reached for his hand. He didn't pull away, but he didn't take it either.
I'm not doing this for revenge,
he added quietly.
I
stopped needing your approval a long time ago. I'm doing this because somebody in this family finally has to tell the truth out loud. Bianca's scheme collapsed entirely once the recordings became public within their social circle. The cold composure she'd worn through every confrontation finally broke in front of the only people left who still mattered to her, her voice shaking for the first time in the entire story as she realized there was no version of events left where she came out untouched. The drugging alone was enough for criminal charges once Dorian's legal team handed everything over to the district attorney's office. The blackmail sealed the rest. She didn't get to control how this story ended either. Within the month, Bianca Wells was formally charged with administering a substance to Donovan without his consent and with blackmail. 2 separate counts that would follow her into a courtroom, whether she was ready for it or not. Donovan, for his part, lost the company leadership he'd been quietly handed his whole life, not because Dorian took it from him out of spite, but because the board could no longer ignore a year of concealment and a scandal that had become impossible to separate from his judgment. He was left, for the first time in 35 years, with nothing he hadn't been handed, and no twin brother left standing beside him to make it easier. Imani still remembers standing on that same rooftop almost a year later, this time with Dorian's hand actually laced through hers instead of simply stretched toward her, and thinking about how far they'd traveled from the afternoon this story began. I told myself I married you for revenge, she said quietly. I didn't realize I was actually marrying the only person in this entire story who never once lied to me. Dorian didn't smile the way most men would have. He looked out at the skyline of the city that had spent 14 years forgetting he existed and said, "I spent my whole life being the son nobody chose first. I built an empire so I'd never need them to choose me again. I never expected the one thing that empire would actually win me was you." A week later, they boarded a private flight together, just the two of them, leaving the city, the cameras, and everything that had happened in it behind for a while. Imani fell asleep against his shoulder somewhere over the ocean, and when she woke, Dorian was still watching her the way he had that very first day at the gym, like she was still the one thing in the world worth coming back for. They spent 10 days somewhere far from anyone who knew their names, doing nothing that mattered to anyone but each other, and for the first time since any of it began, neither of them needed to be anything other than exactly who they were. It wasn't a perfect ending, and Imani never pretended otherwise. She still grieved the friendship Bianca had destroyed, the 8 months Donovan stole from her without telling her the truth, and the family that had broken two brothers against each other before either of them was old enough to understand what was happening to them. But she had her name back. She had a love that had never needed a lie to survive, and she had a husband who had spent his entire life waiting to be chosen and finally chose himself. He fooled a whole hotel full of guests into believing they were watching one wedding fall apart. Would you have seen what was actually happening underneath it? Or would you have stood in that hallway and believed exactly what everyone wanted you to see? If this story kept you watching until the very last second, that's exactly what we love building for you here. We upload a new story like this every single week, so make sure you're subscribed. Drop a comment telling us what you would have done in Imani's place, like this video if it moved you, and share it with someone who needs a story like this today. Thank you for staying with us through I Married His Billionaire Twin for revenge after he cheated with my best friend on our wedding day. We'll see you in the next one.